right, so the airboat's gone. My project for today, yeah, right. My project for the next several days is going to be to make this wiring harness, which came off of that motor over there, more like that wiring harness, so that it'll fit that motor over there and transmission. There's some differences in the pins and stuff like that. I'm going to try to sort that out and see what happens. Maybe it'll shift, maybe it won't. We'll see. Yeah, the real question now is, where do you start? I think I'm going to start by kind of stripping the harness down a little bit and getting it to reach the points that it needs to reach on that motor, because some of the sensors are in different places, and figure out what wires I may need to lengthen, shorten, all that stuff, kind of tie it together a little bit temporarily, kind of get the shape right, so to speak, and we'll see how that works. And I want to figure out, you know, like how long these wires need to be and where I'm going to put the ECU inside of the car. It's 6 o'clock. I think I've created enough of a mess for one day. So this is where we're at. Well, I mean, we're in the same place we always were, but we've made some progress on the wiring harness. I've got the harness laid out where it needs to go, got the lengths of the wires just about right. To get the lengths right, I've doubled up the wiring harness back into itself instead of cutting off wires and re-pinning them or splicing them. Got everything tied together with quick release tie wraps, because I was cutting tie wraps off and putting them back on, so I decided to start using quick release tie wraps. I've got extra wires hanging in bundles. These are the O2 sensors that I'm not going to use. These are rear O2 sensors. Those wires are going to go. This is for the flex fuel sensor and the mass airflow sensor. I'm not exactly sure how long those are going to have to be, but they are going to come out right about there. Got the wire for the starter down here. I still need to put the right end on the starter wire that I'm actually going to use, and a couple of brackets right here to hold the wiring harness up off of the exhaust. Well, I hope they hold it up off the exhaust. All right, now we're on to the part where, well, might be moving forward a little bit. I'm going to connect up some wires to some connectors so that the wiring harness is completely removable, and connect the wires to the fuse block. Got everything spread out in a orderly manner. I figured out where all my wires come from, go to. I've got a wiring diagram laid out to my fuse block and to my two connectors that'll go to the body. So I've laid out my wiring harness ideas. I'm going to run everything through the two connectors. One connector is going to be mostly for engine control and PCM. The other connector is going to be mostly for wires that continue onto the dash. That way I'll be able to remove the wiring harness completely out of the car without having to figure out how to disconnect it all from the fuse block. Hopefully this all works out pretty well. Seems to be working good so far. This is my first crimp with my new crimping pliers. Links to everything that I'm using is going to be in the video description. Now I've just got to find out how well these connectors hold onto the wires and put the wire in the right hole the first time and the right way over. I think that's it. Ooh, click. It's in there. A little wiggly. Guess what I forgot to put on there? The little rubber seal. But at least it's on an open-ended wire. First mistake, and I got lucky. Well, I will rejoin this a lot later in the process. Wiring harness is just basically tossed in there over the top, just testing out the length of the wires and how everything's going to fit. And follow it over the top, over the temporary firewall to a temporary layout to see how everything's going to fit. Well, what you see here is pretty much the way it's going to be laid out. This is the wire that's going to go on up to the dash once I get the other end of the connector wired. It's got cruise control, stuff like that. Everything is wired as far as going to the engine. These two wires are for my ignition switch. This is key on, this is the start. This little panel right here is going to be my main power coming in from the battery. then it's going to branch off into 3 circuits that will power the different relays and circuits on here so that they're not all off one big wire, and also gives me another area to be able to disconnect things from and more fused protection. I've got my throttle pedal in and my wire to the throttle pedal lengthened. I've just got a little bit more wiring to do and a fuel system to put in, and maybe one day we'll see this thing start. Well, that's where I'm at for wiring so far. The question's got to be asked, do I know what I'm doing? Not really. I'm learning as I go. I'm going to put links in the video description below to all the stuff that I used and to where I got wiring diagrams from, maybe a couple of videos that I watched to give me some ideas on how they wired their stuff. There'll be a video when I try to start this thing, and if it runs, then we'll know that the wiring I've done here works. If it starts and runs, that'll be great. Once it actually moves itself, I'm probably going to do a video on my repinning of the 20-pin connector. That is, if the rewiring I did works. This is the biggest part of wiring changes that I have to do, is get the pinouts right on the 20-pin connector. This wiring diagram is for the wires going into the computer. This is from lt1swap.com. A lot of good information on that site. This is just from various other sources on the internet. This is the pinout for the 4L60. The 4L60 has 2 connectors on it. It has the 20-pin connector and it has the connector for the PNP switch. The 4T65 only has 1 connector. That's the 20-pin connector. So all of the wires from the gear position switch all have to be wired into K through F right here. So I have to repin the 20-pin connector to get all those wires put in it. And from what I'm seeing, I have to swap a couple wires around because they are in different locations. I'm not going to go into this in great detail because I really don't know for sure what I'm doing here. I'm learning as I go. But I will put something down below in the video description if this thing does shift good, or if it shifts like it was hit with a sledgehammer or whatever. And I may do a more in-depth video on this somewhere down the road if I get all of this right and it actually works. But I don't want to waste a lot of time shooting a lot of video and give people bad information. So all I can say is I got a lot of pins to add to a connector. This is the connector off of the other wiring harness. And we're going to go with it. Hopefully this works. I'm not sure it's going to work. I did not follow anybody else's wiring diagram. I followed a couple different pinouts and I changed some pins around, added all the pins that went to the park neutral safety switch into the 20-pin connector, and I'm not sure if that's going to work the way I've got it wired or not. But if it works, I'll share my wiring diagrams if anybody can read them. But that's all for now, and I'm going to go back to doing some more wiring and putting a fuel system in this thing for the 2nd time. Thanks for watching. All right, like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, and as always, thanks for watching. And diagrams. Let's start doing this one little piece at a time.